Welcome back, it's nice to see you again. Today I wanted to make the Procreate video that nobody else is making. You see, Procreate is a powerhouse of an app and a mainstay of the iOS App Store, and as a result, most of the videos that are out there are seasoned industry professionals showing you the workflow, which is great. It's useful and depressing if you are trying to get started and knowing that you are not going to compare to them anytime soon. So I wanted to take this unique opportunity and show you my first ever illustration commission and walk you through what I did to make that happen. Now, this was done as part of the Moonlit Ghosts YouTube channel revamp, and we ended up with something that I was really proud of and I thought the client was really happy with. So I will link in the description below to the channel so you can go check that out. And let's jump into the time lapse so I can show you my workflow. So what you're not seeing here is all of the hours that I spent going back and forth with the client trying to understand exactly what he wanted. And we landed on classic horror movie poster with a hand-drawn feel. So what I did was I started by pulling in all of the resources I could. That was some classic horror movie posters, existing text treatments that we'd done before, and then even the layout guides for YouTube banners for the different device sizes. And then I got to work. Now, the first thing I wanted to do was copy the gradient that I had seen in that underwater shot. So I've got this light blue in the middle with the darker blue on the sides, and then I was just going to give it a couple passes where the yellow drawing gets progressively more interesting as you get to larger and larger devices. So you can see on that inner rectangle, it's what you're going to see on your phone, but then as you get to larger devices, you get more of this spooky scene that develops. Now, the other thing you're going to notice is I am not particularly great at drawing people, especially drawing people that need to look like a real recognizable person. So instead what I did was I got a reference image of the YouTuber and I drew over that so that I could get the face and the proportions right, but I changed the outfit to something that was more fitting for a woodsy scene. So at this point, I'm actually high contact with the client and I'm sending back and forth all of these different thoughts and processes and treatments that I'm doing to make sure that he likes the direction I'm going. And you can see that as I was going through this, I kind of had a different direction in mind. The channel is all about the paranormal and trying to discover what's real and what's fake on the internet. And so I had the idea to try and actually represent that with all of the different monsters and spooky things all around the outside of the image. And it turned out he loved that. Now, with this early stage of the illustration, one of the things I was trying to lock in was how I was going to actually tackle the look of the overall piece. And so I've got different layers trying to do the different colors. I liked how the classic horror movies sort of had a 3, maybe 4 color treatment. And so I tried to lock that in with the initial illustration of him standing in the middle of the grass with the lantern. And the one that I was confident that I could take on next was the tree, so I started on that next. You can see as I'm going through the tree, there's a lot of discovery still happening. So for example, I noticed that as I was erasing away some of the fill color, I actually really liked how the gradient showed through in different places. And so I was trying to work out which color was going to be my base color, which color was going to be lit by just the generic moonlight, and which parts were going to be lit by the lantern color. And I will admit that there were multiple times where I got very depressed trying to work this out because it wasn't always exactly working the way I wanted. And you can see the number of times that I've erased and redrawn over the black. I've gone from using negative space to positive space. I'm adding yellow light. I'm trying to rework which parts are done with the dark line. And I eventually give up on the tree and decide just to move on with the layout because I couldn't quite work out exactly how I wanted it to happen. I think that's important for early career illustrators to remember, is that this is a problem solving exercise. This isn't a, I know exactly how to tackle this exercise. And so there's going to be some back and forth and exploration. And I tend to move on and try something different in a different part of the image when I get stuck. And you can see I got rid of the black outlines, and after I laid out the different parts of the trees and the Bigfoot and the giant squid tentacle coming out of the lake there, I sort of came together with this idea of, okay, I can use the background image as the primary light. I can use this darker blue as the main fill color, and I can use the black as the shadows. And I didn't really have an idea of what to do with the yellows, but you will see in a moment that what I ended up doing was using the yellows as an arbitrary emphasis or highlight color. So something to bring an extra layer of dimension wherever I felt like I needed it. And so even though that physically probably isn't correct, considering that only comes from the single lantern light, it was something that I felt worked really well and had a nice little pop of emphasis and color wherever I needed it, especially if what I was drawing was lacking in detail or contrast. Now, surprisingly, a part that I didn't struggle with was getting this sand in the water to look the way that I wanted it. And I kind of had this clear idea of fill in the sand, erase away the grass, erase away the pebbles of the sand, and for the tentacle coming out of the water, that sort of ripply disappear effect. But you will see later, I actually struggled a lot trying to get a similar effect out of fog, and eventually just abandoned my idea altogether because I just couldn't get it working the way I wanted to. So at this point, I'm hiding and showing some layers, and eventually I commit to, okay, let's just do a couple little streaks of yellow, maybe play with these yellow little lights as fireflies, and I can use those as my emphasis. And it starts to come together pretty good. I was trying to work out the details across the board so that wherever you looked, it felt interesting. And the Bigfoot, I wanted it to look like the original Patterson footage Bigfoot, but at the same time fit the style of the overall image. And I think it came out pretty good, which is probably too much thought and effort for something that sits in the corner of the image. But like I said, I was proud of what we ended up with. And so I think if I would have started skimping on details this early in the illustration, it would have shown in the final result. So I ended up being pretty happy with what we did, even though it might not have been the best use of time had I had more industry experience. As you can see, one of the things that I was really struggling with throughout is, especially as I get into the background, how do I make sure that I get good separation from the foreground and the background? And so I kind of faked it with the trees, and I left it hoping that I could come back and revisit it. I wasn't exactly sure how I was going to make it so that you could keep that distance feeling like it's in the distance, but still have readable contrast. So I moved on to the lake. And my original idea was to have sort of this weird myrrh thing creeping up out of the lake and coming around by the boat. And I toyed with a couple different ideas of that, and I couldn't figure out exactly what I wanted. And so while I was playing with different reference images, I just moved on to the boat because I knew that I could draw a boat, and I started filling that in. And you can see I tried to give it the same treatment that I did with the octopus. There's a lot of different ripples that cut through the solid shapes, and then as things disappear underneath the surface, I did the really dark treatment with sort of a decreasing amount of detail as it gets deeper and deeper under the water. Now, at this stage, I've probably sent 3 or 4 versions of this over to him so that he could take a look and give approval on each step. And so far, it was basically no notes across the board. He really liked the direction I was going with this overall piece. And honestly, I was pretty happy with it too. I thought the way that the details were shaping up and what I had drawn were working out really well. The thing that I was really struggling with though is how to tie this overall image that I had put together into a larger image that could bleed all the way to the left side and fade all the way into the background. If you remember, my original illustration had sort of a graveyard or a house, and I had fluctuated between a couple different ideas, and the proportions never actually really matched each other from one side of the image to the other. It was sort of a made-up fantasy perspective that just really didn't make sense, and that was something that I was really struggling to get right. And so you can tell that I'm putting that off as long as possible because I just didn't know how to tackle that problem. So now that I had the mermaid filled in, I thought, okay, let's pull back up the guidelines of the different device sizes on YouTube and see if I can flesh out something for the background that'll make it continuous. So you can see I threw in this weeping willow that covers the front corner of the screen. And I had this idea of this foggy swamp scene with a werewolf howling at the moon that maybe fades into a distant building and some mountains in the background. And so I started pursuing that and realized really quickly that even though I thought I could give the rocks in the fog the same foggy treatment that I did with the water, it just really was not working. With only a couple colors to work with, I found it really hard to get contrast on this little chupacabra that's hiding behind the rock and still make it feel like it was sandy and there was grass and there was layers of fog. And you can see that I go over it multiple times and eventually just give up and do a completely separate layer of fog over the top of it in a completely different color to see if I can get it to look the way that I wanted it to look. And I kind of did. You can see that I even tried to mask it out and use the base color that I've been using other places, but it really just doesn't read like fog. So I gave up and I went back to the weeping willow and I just started drawing leaves like crazy. And I love how weeping willows sort of have these long tendrils of leaves, and I wanted to make it so that it felt dark. It was de-emphasized, it wasn't the focus of attention, especially for such a large element in that bottom left corner, but still had those long, stringy, detailed leaves cascading off the top of the tree. This is one area that I probably could have done in even more detail. I tried to make it, like I said, so it was detailed enough that it felt nice to look at, but not so detailed that it was drawing people's attention. So I got something that looked pretty good and I felt like had good separation from the rest of the image, but overall I probably could have done better. I think that was maybe the piece that I spent the least amount of time on in the entire image. Now from there, I was still depressed about the fog, and so I tried to go back through and readdress different parts of the image where it felt like it was maybe lacking in detail. And so that included the trees, giving some shadows under the trees, and applying some shadows underneath the tall grass and trying to blend it so that the scale of the tall grass sort of diminishes as it gets closer to the trees, trying to give a sense of depth to the overall image. From there, I felt like I had spent a lot of time on this image and I was kind of against the clock, and so I decided to move quickly for the rest of it. I really just threw down some quick detail in the trees. I felt like they were something in the distance that with just a few lines to indicate shadow, I could get depth and the feeling of detail and realness without actually putting that much effort into the background trees. And then that would give me the remaining time to figure out what to do with the mountains and the werewolf and the fog. So for the werewolf, I tried a couple different things and ended up just settling on a quick glimpse of light hitting off of the chest and the fur and trying to get the fog wrapping around the legs, and then leaving that for the time being, thinking that I would come back and revisit it later and try to make it, look a little bit nicer, a little bit more detailed, in sort of the same way that I had done with the cat and the tree and the Bigfoot. And from there, I jumped over. I thought, okay, if I can't get the fog to work right, what I can do is I can make this into maybe like a swampy graveyard scene. And then I can sort of have this swirly, swampy effect, but there's enough high detail things for people to focus their eyes on. And now the last piece was I tried to add some bats up into the top left corner, and it looked okay, but he wanted to have something more detailed like a Mothman or something. And I had in the back of my head, where can I fit in Cthulhu somewhere? And so as soon as he asked for that one modification, that's what I did. And at that point, I was sort of out of time. He needed to publish his new channel. And so I ended up calling it there. I never got to revisit the werewolf or make the mist going behind the trees or the mountains any more detailed than they were. So overall, something I was really proud of. It was the most detailed that I had ever done. And he was really happy with the outcome. And I think it works really well as a YouTube banner. So check his channel out. I'll link in the description below. And if you want more videos like this, or on Pixelmator Pro, which is where I spend most of my time talking about photo editing, make sure you stick around, like, and subscribe. Okay, thanks. Appreciate your support. We'll catch you in the next one.